Hey everybody, and welcome to Valid of Vietnam. My name is James Scott and I'm going to be your host today. Valid of Vietnam is a program dedicated to tracing the arc of experience of our local Vietnam veterans as they went from Sacramento, California, we're widening the net this time to New York, to Vietnam, and then back again. Valid of Vietnam is a joint venture between the Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 500, and the Sacramento Public Library. So let's get going. This week's guest, I'm very happy to welcome Bill Ludwig. Thanks for being here, and of course, welcome home. Bill was with the 196th Light Infantry Brigade in the I Corps section of Vietnam. Tell us a bit. So you finish up at Brooklyn Tech.
Right.
And you know, the future opens up and it leads you to Pratt. Tell us about Pratt.
Out of the blue, I got a letter from Pratt. Mm-hmm. And they were embarking on a whole new engineering program, and at the time it was called engineering science. Mm-hmm. And it was really a prelude to what morphed into nuclear engineering.
Okay.
And it was this, you know, historically beautiful school.
Yeah.
And
with a great library, by the way.
That's, yeah. The library is, I don't know how old it is, but it went way back to the turn of the century. You know, the Pratt thing was, towards the end of that, was how I got involved in the military.
And that was an ROTC type thing?
They had a Army ROTC program. No one in my family had ever been in the military. And of course the Vietnam War was going on. During that time was also the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Jack Kennedy being the president and all of that. The program eventually allowed you to go into the military as an officer.
But of course you did exceptionally well in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, at a camp, maneuvers, whatever, which
was a surprise to me and everybody else. It was you know, one of those things that happened, and I'll probably never know why. In the summer between the third year and the fourth year, you're required to go to a military training facility and basically take positions, actual leadership positions. And we were assigned to this huge thing in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I don't even remember anymore how many thousands of ROTC people from various schools got there. They gave you assignments on a given day, training that disciplined you to give up personal concerns or whatever in deferring to the good of the group. And there was a lot of bonding, a lot of physical training, and also taking over units of various sizes and directing them in missions and stuff. And then stressful operations where you had to do night operations and operations where you had to practice survival skills, you know, and all of that kind of stuff. So very strenuous, and also kind of putting you on notice that if you look towards being in that leadership position, that you had to be prepared to take the true leader position, you know, where your responsibilities come first. Amazingly enough, I came out in the evaluations at the end of it, the 9th person out of 3,000. And so when that word got back to the people at the school and the military, it was like unbelievable to them. As a result of that, that was starting to become one of the peak times of the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And so they knew that I had been in the process of going through changes in my major at school, and but because of the issues with Vietnam, they came to me and said, you know, if you're not sure about what you want to do, we'd be willing to offer you a commission in the military, in the Army, if you're willing to enter into the infantry command structure and also volunteer to go to Vietnam. So, giving it no thought whatsoever,
Mm-hmm.
and being at that ripe old age in my early 20s,
Right.
I said, sure.
Do you transition from Pratt to Fort Benning, where you do your basic, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then Oakland, and then overseas. Tell us a bit about that transition, Pratt onward.
The transition to Fort Benning, you got to remember, I grew up in a family that was all about family,
Mm-hmm.
and concentrated on family interactions and everything, and there was no, we didn't go on trips and we didn't go vacationing. And yes, I have a college education, and yes, I'm trained and all that kind of stuff, but now I'm leaving that cocoon,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And it was a movie. It was,
Yeah.
I think I don't know whether I told you this or not, but I think I did, is that I had never flown any place and gone anywhere. And so one of the really strange things about going somewhere as an officer candidate at that time is you didn't go with a unit.
Yeah,
You went by yourself. They sent you a letter and you said, be here, you know, on this particular day. I wound up going on a train
Mm-hmm.
from New York to Fort Benning, Georgia. And the ROTC training program is not the same as what they call OCS, which is the Officer Candidate School,
Mm-hmm.
where you go from an enlisted man into a program. You know, OCS is a lot more difficult because they're coming from different backgrounds and sometimes lesser education and all that. And so what the ROTC people went through was more of a, I guess the way to describe it was you were assumed at that point to be educated.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the training was more like going to a school, you know.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But different in the sense that it was accompanied with a lot of physical training.
Sure.
And all. This is where I was introduced to the single phrase that accompanied everybody there for every minute of every day of every class, and that was, if you don't pay attention and learn this, you are going to die in Vietnam. And everything was tailored towards Vietnam. They had makeshift Vietnamese villages
Right.
constructed in Fort Benning. Enemy troops that were dressed up like Vietnamese
Mm-hmm.
and all of that, so that they tried to give you an immersion into what you might see on any given day. There was lots of conversation about the culture. There was conversation about what goes on, you know, different types of military maneuvers and, you know, all kinds of stuff. And so then you get into the intensive stuff where they would teach you about conducting night patrols,
Okay.
ambush patrols, living off the land a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They would teach you about awareness and focus on things like booby traps, how to construct certain types of demolitions,
Right.
how to set up certain types of situations and stuff.
And about what year is this? Bill?
1966. By the time you got through that program, you had a really detailed orientation on, the nitty-gritty of going. This was like spring of '67 when I finally got the orders to go to Vietnam. You got a paper in the mail and it said, you're required to do this. Go home 30 days. Didn't say it, but put your affairs in order.
Right.
Okay? And then report to Oakland. They left out the part of training with your own unit and bonding with your own unit, and left it to a situation where everybody's coming from different directions and is going to meet sometime and start doing combat operations in Vietnam.
Right.
Without ever having worked together before.
Right.
So that was a big shock.
Tell us a little bit about once you got to Saigon, Tan Son Nhut. Describe the chaos and just the lack of guidance when you got there, because I think that really illustrates.
Yeah, I mentioned to you that part of this surreal aspects of this thing was, how do you get to Vietnam? Well, you're by yourself. What happens? There's no guidebook to show you or tell you anything. I go and fly commercial to Oakland. I get off the plane in Oakland. There's hundreds of people there, all officers, whatever. Nobody has any clue as to what they're really about to do, really, except maybe some of the senior guys that are going on a second tour. You don't go on a C-130 or something. You go on a commercial jet. And you're looking around and you're saying, God, this is crazy, And so you get over there after a 20 hours flight or something, and you land. You go to approach Saigon, and the first thing you see when you look out the window is you see all the holes in the ground from the artillery and the whatever. You see that from a distance, and you see a lot of haze and smoke and everything like that, and a lot of jungle stuff, depending on where you are. And so anyway, they land. The first thing the pilot says is, we're going to circle because there's sniper fire coming in from wherever. So you circle, and everybody's looking at one another saying, oh gee, because by this time you're not in anything but your raggedy uniforms, but there's no weapons or anything like that, so you have nothing, you and your suitcase or whatever. You get off the plane, and the first thing that happens when you reach the door of the plane is you almost get knocked on the ground with the humidity. And then you get the smells of the area, and that's the first thing that affects you. You don't know what the hell it is, and all of a sudden you're sweating and you haven't done anything yet. You know what I mean? And so you go and you report into this place, and like you said, there are literally thousands of people there, and they're doing everything imaginable, from driving trucks and jeeps and all sorts of vehicles and moving freight, and doing that. And then there's this tent. And it's like a processing facility. Well, what happened to me was I walked in, and the first thing they said is, we don't have any record of who you are or where you're going. And so you need to go over there and find yourself a bunk, and we'll figure this out. The first 2 days I was there, I was just there, and you could hear the artillery and the gunfire.
You eventually are assigned to the 196th Light Infantry.
Yes.
And that's up country. That's going to be an I Corps, is kind of a support unit to Marine operations that are going on up there. You made some strong decisions to keep your men safe, to try to protect them. And so tell us about the end of the tour and transitioning back to the United States.
Number one, it was unexpected what happened, but I'll get into that, I guess. I finally got, well, two things happened. One was typically when you'd been in a combat situation for a long time, which I was, towards the end of your tour, they tried to rotate you into a non-combat position, you know, for whatever. And I was being moved in the unit towards the end, towards coming back into the headquarters. But contrary what normally would have happened, and I'd have a slow transition back home, you know, a unit got in trouble, and the commander of the battalion asked me if I would go out back into the field, into this unit that was trapped. Myself and another lieutenant who was going home at the same time by the name of Bob Landry, volunteered. We went, you know, and jumped on a helicopter and got whisked out into the middle of the jungle, you know, a week before we were going home, and went in and got a hold of this company that was essentially isolated and surrounded, and we took charge of the unit and took them out during the night over a river crossing, a few other things, and got them out over a period of days.
Yeah.
And so that left us like bringing him in, getting helicoptered again back to Chulai, and having like a half a day or a day before we were flying back to Saigon.
Not what you would expect.
No, and so there was no transition. We got back to Saigon, and obviously we were with a bunch of guys mostly that we knew, again going back alone, not with our own unit.
I mean, is there a sense of some relief, you know?
Well, there's a sense of relief, but mostly there's a sense of guilt, is the word, I guess, where guilt over having been able to go home, guilt over having to leave the people you were dedicated to helping and protecting and whatever, to somebody else who you don't know, feeling good about getting out of it, to some degree, and apprehension about what now. I think everybody that was getting on the plane to go home had a couple of thoughts. Scared to get on the plane for fear that somebody decided to take souvenirs home and there's explosives on the plane. And then what to expect, because literally for the whole time you were in that environment, you hadn't thought 5 minutes about what you were going to do with the rest of your life. The Vietnam War was obviously a war without question, and 57,000 people died as a result of it, not including the million Vietnamese, I guess. When veterans came back from that, I had to communicate what things were like. What you heard all the time when people asked you questions was, from the veteran, was, I really can't talk about it. You don't understand because you weren't there. And where that came from, in my opinion, and it certainly did for me, and I learned after going to the VA for so many years to get straightened out, was that the Vietnam War was far more, with all due respect to all of the casualties and wounded and all of that, was a psychological war. Every minute of every day, no matter whether you were a lieutenant or a private or whatever, okay, you lived in constant stress and fear that you were going to die at any minute, or you were going to be hurt or maimed. And it's not because you were just a weak person. It was because you were under this cloud of uncertainty and stress all of the time.
Right.
So you never slept at night. You slept for an hour or awake for an hour, or slept for an hour and awake for 3 hours or whatever. You were always on guard because you were responsible.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. You went home in that mindset,
Mm-hmm.
where for an entire year, or for however long you spent over there, you lived that way. Add on to that the added trauma of the combat experience, and it just packaged you as somebody who you didn't even know who you were.
That career and the success you had and the industry that you put into that suppressed the PTSD
Yeah.
that you had suffered. You have become an advocate. It's been a passion. I want you to talk about that. I want you to talk about as much as you can about that transition to understanding that condition.
For me personally, when the plane landed in New York, and I was coming down the escalator, and I had my full uniform on, and obviously it wasn't very pressed or anything. It was kind of wrinkled, but had, decorations and, all that stuff. And I had my, duffel bag. At the bottom of the escalator was my mother, my father, my 2 brothers and their wives, and my fiance. The minute I saw them, I realized that something had changed, and I didn't know what it was. This security blanket that they had given me as a child was gone. And I felt that I was entering into a totally different family. And all they were doing was trying to wrap me back in that security blanket. They, everybody hugged, everybody was crying, everybody was doing all this. And I was just overwhelmed with not knowing what to do. And they didn't know what to do. And my father and I got extraordinarily close for the rest of his life. It was in the eyes of family and everything like that. That was everything was perfect. But I was isolated, and I took progressively harder and harder jobs, more difficult jobs, taxing jobs. It caused me to be remote, depressed, angry, and even to some extent abusive, but certainly verbally at times. I went to the VA because I knew that there were issues, but I didn't know what they were, and I was having a lot of intestinal stomach issues and everything, and I thought I had a bleeding ulcer. I met my wife Carol, my wife now, and she was a lifesaver, and she was somebody that had been acquainted with the family, including my first wife. 6 years ago, very late in life, I went to the VA, and I was brought into the mental health unit and put into the trauma program for PTSD. I go to Mather. I've been there for years now, and it's superb.
It's made a huge difference in the world.
It's really been superb.
You run into someone having conversation, you find out that they're a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And you feel comfortable enough to say a few things to them. What is the single most important advice you would give to that person?
The first thing that they should do is take advantage of the programs that are available for reintroduction by the VA and by the people who are trained by the VA.
Right.
Because one of the critical things that happened to me that was a stunning wake-up call. I walked into a room and there was a group of people sitting in a circle, all veterans, some Marines, some Army, all but one was Vietnam. Mm-hmm. One guy was an Iraq veteran. It was shocking to me that every single person in the room had the same issues as I had. And up until that time, I thought I was the only one. And so I would say to the young guys, this is not about macho, and it's not about nothing wrong with me type of thing, that don't wait until you're 70 years old to find out that you could have had a better life.
This is essentially going to end our episode of Valid of Vietnam.
Thank you, sir.
Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming
thank
in.
You. It's a pleasure.
And I want to, for India Curry and Jerry Ward, our co-producers, and all of our veterans. So thank you very much for watching, and again, we'll see you next time on Valid of Vietnam.